My mother gave away my dead grandmother's jewelry collection to her stepdaughter to win her approval. She lost me instead. Vanessa hated my mother from day one, called her a gold digger, refused to acknowledge her existence. My mother spent 6 years desperately trying to win her over. Expensive gifts, paying for her college apartment, buying her a car for graduation, bending over backward while Vanessa treated her like garbage. I watched my mother grovel for crumbs of approval while ignoring the daughter who actually loved her. She missed my college graduation to attend Vanessa's boyfriend's birthday party, because Vanessa said she'd consider inviting her to the wedding if she showed up. Vanessa didn't even introduce her to anyone at the party. When my grandmother died last year, she left me her jewelry collection specifically in the will. Not to my mother, to me. 43 pieces collected over 60 years, each with a story. The pearl necklace from her wedding to my grandfather in 1959, worn while escaping Hungary during the revolution. The emerald ring from her mother, hidden in a flower jar during the war. The charm bracelet with a charm from every country she'd visited after finally getting freedom to travel. The cameo brooch she'd worn to her citizenship ceremony, crying with joy. Grandmother taught me about each piece starting when I was 7, made me promise to preserve them, pass them to my own daughter someday. She'd say, "These aren't just jewelry. They're our family's survival, our triumph, our proof that we made it through." I kept them in a safety deposit box, only wore the simple gold band she'd given me for my 18th birthday, the day she said I was now old enough to be a keeper of stories. 2 months ago, Vanessa got engaged to some investment banker named Harrison. She complained constantly about not having family heirlooms for the wedding, how her mother died when she was young and left nothing special, how Harrison's family had generations of jewelry and she'd look poor beside them. My mother saw an opportunity. She convinced me to bring the collection home so we could catalog it for insurance purposes. I spent a weekend photographing each piece, documenting their histories in a leather journal, organizing paperwork. My grandmother's stories filling page after page, left everything in the locked drawer of my childhood dresser while I went back to my apartment. Came back the next weekend to find the drawer empty. My mother was sitting in the kitchen with tears of joy in her eyes. "I gave them to Vanessa," she said. She finally called me Mom. She hugged me. 6 years, and she finally hugged me. She'd given away my entire inheritance, my grandmother's legacy, 70 years of family history, to a woman who'd treated her like trash for 6 years. For one word. Mom. For one brief hug that probably killed Vanessa to give. Vanessa had already taken the pieces, posted on Instagram about her amazing stepmother's generosity. Said she'd wear the pearls at her wedding, the emerald for her engagement photos, was having the charm bracelet melted down to make new jewelry because it was too old-fashioned. Melted down. 60 years of memories, stories of survival and hope, turned into some trendy necklace. My grandmother's escape from communism reduced to scrap metal. I demanded them back immediately. My mother said I was being selfish, that family shares, that Vanessa deserved nice things for her wedding, that I had no idea how hard it was being rejected by Philip's daughter. I reminded her they were legally mine, documented in the will, witnessed by 3 people. She said I could sue if I wanted to destroy the family, but what kind of daughter would do that? Philip got involved, said I was causing drama, that his daughter's happiness mattered more than some old jewelry, that I should be happy to finally have a sister who accepted us. Vanessa posted photos wearing my grandmother's pieces, tagged them as family heirlooms from her beloved stepmother, talked about how meaningful it was to have this connection to her new family's history. My mother liked every post, commented about how beautiful Vanessa looked, how proud she was to share these treasures with her new daughter, the daughter who'd made her cry every holiday for 6 years. I gave them 1 week to return everything. They ignored me. So I called my grandmother's estate lawyer, who still had copies of everything. Turned out my grandmother was smarter than we knew. She'd had the valuable pieces appraised and photographed professionally, registered them with a Heritage Foundation for Holocaust Survivors Artifacts, included a clause that they couldn't be sold or destroyed without Foundation approval. Any violation would trigger an immediate lawsuit from the Foundation's legal team. She'd known my mother's weakness for approval, planned for this. The lawyer contacted Vanessa directly. She had 72 hours to return every piece or face criminal charges for destroying historical artifacts. The lawyer sent the message within an hour of my call. I spent the rest of the evening sitting on my couch, trying to imagine Vanessa opening that email and reading about criminal charges and Heritage Foundation violations. My hands shook when I made tea, the same way grandmother's hands shook when she told me about hiding jewelry from soldiers who came through her village. I set the cup down and watched the steam rise, thinking about how I was fighting my own battle now to protect what she trusted me with. The apartment felt too quiet, too still, like the air before a storm hits. My phone rang at 11 that night. My mother's name lit up the screen. I answered and she started screaming before I could say hello. She said I was destroying the family over some old jewelry, that Vanessa was hysterical, that Harrison's family would find out about legal trouble. The wedding would be ruined. Why couldn't I just let this go for the sake of peace? Her voice got higher and louder with each word, like she was the victim here instead of the person who stole from me. I waited for her to take a breath, Then I reminded her that she stole my legal inheritance and gave it to someone who planned to melt down grandmother's escape from communism into trendy accessories. She went quiet for a moment. The silence stretched out between us. Then she said I was being dramatic and grandmother would have wanted the family to share. That sentence made me so angry I had to hang up before I said something I couldn't take back. I threw my phone on the couch and pressed my palms against my eyes. The next morning, I woke up and checked Instagram. Vanessa's posts about the jewelry were suddenly gone. Her whole account went private. I grabbed my laptop and found the cached version still available through Google search. I took screenshots of everything. Her wearing grandmother's pearls, her talking about melting the charm bracelet to make something modern. The lawyer said these might be needed as evidence of her intent to destroy protected artifacts. I saved them in 3 different places, made sure the timestamps showed. Philip called me from work around 10. He used his stern father voice, the one he thought made him sound important. He said I needed to drop this legal action right now. Vanessa made an innocent mistake. She didn't know about any Heritage Foundation registration. I was being mean and cruel to an innocent young woman who was just excited about her wedding. His tone made it clear he expected me to apologize and back down like I was a child being scolded. I told Philip that grandmother specifically registered the pieces to prevent exactly this situation. She knew my mother's weakness for approval and planned for it. That made him sputter with rage. He said I was calling my own mother weak and pathetic, that I was ungrateful for everything they'd done for me. If I continued this path, I'd be uninvited from Vanessa's wedding and possibly cut off from the family entirely. The threat hung in the air like he expected me to beg for forgiveness. The threat of being cut off from the family landed differently than Philip expected. I heard myself laugh, a bitter sound that surprised me. I told him that a family that steals from me and threatens me for wanting my inheritance back isn't much of a family. Maybe grandmother knew that too when she set up all those legal protections. Philip started yelling, but I hung up. My hand was steady this time. That afternoon, the estate lawyer called. Vanessa's attorney had contacted him trying to negotiate an extension on the 72-hour deadline. They claimed she needed time to locate all the pieces. The lawyer said this was code for her scrambling to buy replacements for anything she'd already damaged or given away. His voice stayed calm and professional, but I could hear the knowing tone underneath. He'd seen this before. The lawyer asked if I wanted to grant an extension. I thought about grandmother hiding jewelry in flower jars during the war. I thought about her crying at her citizenship ceremony wearing the cameo brooch, finally becoming American after so many years of dreaming about freedom. I said no extensions. The deadline stands. If even one piece is missing or damaged, we proceed with criminal charges and foundation lawsuit. The lawyer said he'd inform Vanessa's attorney immediately. That evening, Vanessa tried calling me directly. I stared at her name on my screen, surprised because she'd never called me in 6 years. Not once. I let it go to voicemail. Later, I listened to her crying, saying she didn't understand how important the jewelry was. She was sorry and just wanted to make this right. We're family, and family should forgive each other. Her voice broke on the word family like she actually believed we were. I saved the voicemail in 3 different places on my phone, made sure the timestamps were clear. The lawyer had said any contact from Vanessa might be useful later. Her crying sounded real enough, but I kept thinking about all the times she made my mother cry. 6 years of birthday parties where my mother wasn't invited. Holiday dinners where Vanessa made sure there wasn't an extra seat. Every expensive gift my mother bought that Vanessa accepted without even a thank you text. The car for graduation that Vanessa complained about because it wasn't the color she wanted. My college graduation that my mother missed because Vanessa dangled the possibility of being called mom someday. I deleted the notification from my screen and went to bed. My mother showed up at my apartment the next morning without calling first. I heard the knocking at 7:30 and opened the door to find her standing there looking like she hadn't slept. Her eyes were red and puffy. Her hair wasn't done the way she usually kept it. She pushed past me into my apartment before I could say anything. She started talking immediately about how I needed to show mercy to Vanessa. She said Harrison's family was very traditional, and any hint of legal trouble could end the engagement. She said I was potentially ruining Vanessa's entire future over jewelry that was just sitting in a box anyway. She paced around my living room while she talked. Her hands were shaking. She kept saying that Vanessa was young and made a mistake and deserved forgiveness. I stood by the door and watched her work herself up into tears. I asked my mother if she remembered any of the stories grandmother told us about those pieces. I asked if she remembered the pearl necklace from the wedding in Budapest before the revolution. I asked about the emerald ring hidden in the flower jar during the war. My mother stopped pacing and waved her hand at me like I was being ridiculous. She said those were just family stories, probably made up or at least stretched bigger over time. She said the jewelry's real value was making people happy now, not sitting around thinking about old, sad things that happened decades ago. She said grandmother would want the family to share and be happy together. She said I was being selfish, holding on to the past when I could be helping Vanessa start her future. The way my mother dismissed grandmother's entire history made something crack inside my chest. 70 years of survival and hope reduced to inconvenient obstacles to Vanessa's happiness. Stories of hiding from soldiers turned into probably exaggerated family tales. I told my mother to leave. I said I had nothing more to say to her. She stared at me for a second like she couldn't believe I was serious. Then she started crying again and saying I'd become cold and hard. She said grandmother wouldn't recognize the selfish person I'd turned into. She said I was choosing jewelry over family. I opened my apartment door and stood there until she left. She was still crying on my doorstep. I closed the door and locked it. After my mother left, I sat on my couch for a while just breathing. Then I pulled out the leather journal where I'd documented each piece's history. I turned to the page about the charm bracelet. 14 charms from 14 countries grandmother visited after finally getting freedom to travel. Each one represented a place she'd dreamed of seeing during years of being trapped behind the Iron Curtain. The Eiffel Tower charm from Paris, where she cried in a cafe because she could order whatever she wanted. The gondola from Venice, where she rode in a boat and felt like she was floating through a dream. The Little Big Ben from London, where she stood in Trafalgar Square and fed pigeons just because she could. Every charm had a story about freedom and hope and finally getting to live the life she'd fought so hard to reach. I read each story in my own handwriting and felt grandmother's voice in my head. The 72-hour deadline passed at 2 in the afternoon on the third day. I sat by my phone and watched the minutes tick by. 2:15, 2:30, 2:45. At 2:47, my phone rang with the lawyer's number. He said Vanessa had delivered a box to his office containing jewelry. He said he needed me to come verify everything was present and not damaged before we could close this matter. His voice was careful and professional. I said I'd be there in 20 minutes. I grabbed my documentation journal and the folder of photographs I'd taken 2 months ago. I drove to the lawyer's office with my stomach doing flips. My hands were sweating on the steering wheel. I kept thinking about what I might find when I got there. The lawyer's office was in a nice building downtown. He met me in the lobby and took me back to a conference room. Everything was laid out on a big table. Pieces of grandmother's jewelry spread across the dark wood surface. I pulled out my documentation and started checking each piece against my records. The pearl necklace was there. I picked it up and my hands were shaking. The emerald ring was there in its little velvet box. I went through piece by piece, checking off each one in my journal. 39 of the 43 pieces were present and looked okay. That should have felt like winning, but instead I got suspicious. I checked my documentation again more carefully. I realized the 4 missing pieces were the charm bracelet, a sapphire pendant, grandmother's citizenship ceremony cameo brooch, and a simple gold locket that held tiny photos of her parents who died in the war. The 4 pieces with the most personal meaning. The ones that weren't just valuable but carried the most history. I looked up at the lawyer and told him 4 pieces were missing. He picked up his phone immediately. The lawyer called Vanessa's attorney and put him on speaker. He asked about the missing pieces in a calm, professional voice. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Then Vanessa's attorney said those 4 pieces were already modified for Miss Vanessa's use before the legal notice arrived. He said they were willing to compensate me for the appraised value plus 20% for the inconvenience. His voice sounded like he thought this was a reasonable solution, like money could replace grandmother's stories. I felt like someone had punched me in the stomach. The charm bracelet was the piece grandmother spent the most time telling me about. Each charm was a story of freedom and hope. Each one represented a dream that came true after so many years of dreaming. The lawyer looked at my face and I guess he could see what I was feeling. He told Vanessa's attorney that money wasn't acceptable for registered heritage artifacts. He said they had 4 hours to produce the pieces in original condition, or criminal charges would be filed. He said the Heritage Foundation didn't accept money for destroyed artifacts. His voice got harder as he talked. Vanessa's attorney started trying to argue, but the lawyer cut him off and said the clock was ticking. He hung up the phone and looked at me. I was staring at the empty spaces on the table where those 4 pieces should have been. The lawyer picked up his phone right away and dialed. He put it on speaker and I heard ringing. Then a man's voice answered. The lawyer asked about the 4 missing pieces in a calm voice. Vanessa's attorney started talking fast, saying the pieces had already been modified before any legal notice arrived. He said they were willing to pay me the value plus 20% extra for my trouble. His voice sounded like he thought this was fair, like grandmother's stories could be bought. The lawyer cut him off mid-sentence and told him the Heritage Foundation registration had been public record for 3 years. He said not knowing about it wasn't a defense. He said the clock was still ticking on the deadline. After he hung up, he looked at me and spoke quieter. He said the modified pieces might be okay if Vanessa kept the original parts, but he couldn't promise anything. I nodded, but my stomach felt sick thinking about what might have happened to grandmother's charm bracelet. I sat there staring at the pieces on the table, counting them over and over, hoping I'd made a mistake about which ones were missing. An hour passed, then another. The lawyer made some calls about other cases but kept checking his watch. I texted my boss that I'd be late coming back from lunch. At exactly 2 hours after the phone call, the receptionist buzzed the office. She said Vanessa was here. The lawyer told her to send them back. I stood up without thinking, my hands gripping the edge of the table. The door opened and Vanessa walked in carrying a small purple velvet bag. Her face was a mess. Black mascara ran down both cheeks in streaks. Her eyes were red and puffy. Harrison came in right behind her, staying close like he was protecting her from something. He had his hand on her back. Vanessa walked straight to the table and put the bag down. Her hands were shaking. She said these were the pieces, that she'd called the jeweler and made them stop working and put everything back how it was. Her voice cracked when she talked. Harrison stayed standing behind her with his arms crossed. I reached for the bag, but the lawyer stopped me. He put on white gloves first, then carefully opened it. He pulled out the sapphire pendant and set it on the table. It looked okay. Then the gold locket with the tiny photos of grandmother's parents. That one looked fine too. Relief started building in my chest. Maybe this would be okay. Maybe nothing was actually destroyed. Then he pulled out the charm bracelet and my heart dropped. It wasn't a bracelet anymore. It was just a pile of loose charms and a broken chain. Each charm had been pulled off separately. I could see tiny scratches on the metal where they'd been forced apart. 14 charms from 14 countries, all scattered loose in the bag. The last thing he pulled out was the cameo brooch. Grandmother's face in profile, carved in shell, but it wasn't in the Victorian gold setting anymore. Someone had put it in a modern silver frame that looked completely wrong. Vanessa started talking fast. She said the jeweler could put them back together. She said nothing was actually destroyed, just taken apart. She said it would be fine. They'd fix it. But I was holding one of the charms in my hand. A tiny Eiffel Tower from her first trip to Paris in 1968. I could feel the scratches under my fingernail where it had been ripped off the chain. The lawyer picked up the cameo brooch and examined it carefully. He looked at the modern setting, then at me. He said this was destruction of heritage artifacts even if they could be repaired. He said the original work and historical value had been damaged. He used the word compromised. Vanessa started crying harder. She said she didn't know, that she thought they were just old jewelry. She asked if we could please forget this whole thing. Her voice got higher and more desperate. Harrison stepped forward then. He pulled out his checkbook from his jacket pocket. He asked what amount I wanted. He said his family had resources and this could all go away quietly if I just named a price. He sounded so casual about it, like grandmother's escape from Hungary was just a number on a check, like 60 years of survival and hope could be bought off. I looked at him standing there in his expensive suit, then at my mother's texts on my phone from last night about how I should just share with family. Both of them thinking money or approval mattered more than what these pieces actually meant. I looked up at the lawyer and told him to go ahead with the criminal charges and the Heritage Foundation lawsuit. My voice came out steady even though my hands were shaking. Vanessa's crying stopped instantly. She stared at me for a second, then started screaming. She called me a vindictive witch. She said I was jealous of her happiness. She said I was destroying her life over some old junk. Harrison grabbed her shoulders and pulled her back toward the door. The lawyer stood up and asked them to leave his office. He said all future talking would go through attorneys. Harrison steered Vanessa out while she kept yelling back at me. The door slammed. The lawyer sat back down and started making notes. I stayed standing there holding the little Eiffel Tower charm, feeling the scratches that would never fully go away. That evening my phone went crazy. Messages started coming in from family members I barely remembered. My mother's cousins, Philip's brother, even my grandmother's old neighbors. All of them saying I was going too far. They said Vanessa made a mistake but didn't deserve criminal charges. They said I needed to think about the family's reputation. They said grandmother would want peace, not lawsuits. Message after message, all saying the same things in different ways. I turned my phone completely off and sat in my dark apartment. I pulled off the gold band grandmother gave me for my 18th birthday and held it up to the window. Light came through it. She'd told me that day that I was old enough to be a keeper of stories now. The next morning, I drove to meet the Heritage Foundation representative. Her name was Dr. Kowalski, and she worked with Holocaust survivor artifacts. We met at the lawyer's office where all the pieces were still laid out. She came in wearing white gloves and carrying a big camera and a notebook. She picked up each piece so carefully like they were made of glass. She took photos from every angle. She wrote detailed notes about every scratch and change. When she got to the charm bracelet pieces, she spent almost 20 minutes just on those, documenting how each charm had been removed and where the damage was. She picked up the cameo brooch and looked at it for a long time. Then she told me the charm bracelet could be fixed by a professional, but would never be exactly like grandmother wore it. She said the cameo brooch being taken out of its original Victorian setting destroyed historical information that couldn't be recovered. Her voice was gentle, but she didn't try to make it sound better than it was. I liked that she was honest. She didn't pretend the damage was no big deal. She treated grandmother's pieces with the respect they deserved. After she finished examining everything, she sat down with me and the lawyer. She explained that the foundation was going to file their own lawsuit separate from my criminal complaint. She said that meant Vanessa would face problems even if I somehow dropped my personal charges later. She said the foundation took destruction of registered artifacts very seriously. These pieces represented shared cultural memory, not just my family's history. They were proof of survival for lots of people, not just grandmother. The foundation had to protect that. Afternoon, my phone rang from an unknown number. I let it go to voicemail while I made dinner. The message was from Vanessa's lawyer asking to schedule a meeting to discuss options. I deleted it and blocked the number. 3 days later, I was walking to my car after work when Vanessa appeared in the parking lot. She must have been waiting because she stepped out from between two cars right as I approached. Her face was red and blotchy from crying. She started yelling about how I ruined her life over some old jewelry. She said grandmother would be ashamed of me. She called me a terrible person who cared more about dead people than living family. Her voice got louder with each sentence. Other people in the parking lot stopped and stared. I kept walking toward my car and pulled out my phone. Vanessa followed me, screaming about how Harrison's family was asking questions. She grabbed my arm and I yanked it away. 2 security guards came running across the parking lot. They got between us and asked what was happening. Vanessa tried to explain, but she was crying too hard to make sense. One guard gently moved her back while the other stayed with me. They escorted Vanessa to her car and watched her drive away. The guard who stayed asked if I was okay. I nodded and got in my car. My hands shook on the steering wheel. Inside the building, my boss called me into her office. She asked if I was okay and if I needed time off to deal with family issues. I explained briefly about the inheritance theft and the legal situation. My boss listened without interrupting. When I finished, she told me she dealt with something similar when her father died. She said family members fought over his estate for 2 years. She understood completely. She told me to take whatever time I needed for court dates or meetings. I thanked her and went back to my desk. Having someone understand without judging felt strange after weeks of family members calling me vindictive. Over the next several weeks, the criminal case moved forward. Vanessa's attorney realized they couldn't win at trial. The documentation was too strong. The Heritage Foundation involvement made it worse. The prosecutor called my lawyer with a deal. Vanessa would plead guilty to theft. She'd pay full restitution, including restoration costs. She'd serve probation with community service. No jail time, but she'd have a criminal record. My lawyer called me at work to discuss it. He asked if I found the plea acceptable. I sat at my desk staring at the gold band on my finger. Grandmother always said justice matters, but so does knowing when you've won. I thought about her hiding jewelry in flower jars during the war. I thought about her crying at her citizenship ceremony. I told my lawyer yes to the plea deal. Not because I forgave Vanessa. I was just tired. I wanted this to end, so I could focus on properly honoring grandmother's memory. 3 days before the trial date, Vanessa accepted the plea deal. The hearing was scheduled for the following week. I took the morning off work and drove to the courthouse. The courtroom was small and plain with wooden benches. My mother and Philip sat on one side. I sat on the other. Vanessa came in wearing a black dress and no makeup. Her lawyer walked beside her. The judge entered and everyone stood. The proceedings started with the prosecutor reading the charges. Vanessa stood when asked. The judge asked how she pleaded. She said guilty in a voice barely above a whisper. She didn't look at me once during the entire thing. I scanned the courtroom for Harrison. He wasn't there. That told me everything about whether their engagement survived the scandal. The judge moved to sentencing. He read from a paper listing the restitution amount, $47,000. It covered the appraised value of damaged pieces, professional restoration costs, legal fees, the Heritage Foundation's expenses. Vanessa's face went completely white. She grabbed the table in front of her. Her lawyer put a hand on her shoulder. I felt a grim satisfaction knowing this would hurt financially for years. The judge continued with probation terms and community service hours. Vanessa nodded at everything without speaking. My mother stood up suddenly. She said she wanted to pay the restitution on Vanessa's behalf. The judge looked at her over his glasses. He said part of the sentence was that Vanessa must personally pay as acknowledgement of responsibility. My mother started crying right there in the courtroom. Philip had to help her sit back down. Both of them shot me looks of pure hatred as the judge finished reading the sentence. The bailiff led Vanessa out through a side door. My mother and Philip left without looking back at me. I stayed sitting until the courtroom emptied. After the sentencing, I met Dr. Kowalski in the courthouse lobby. She took me across town to meet the restoration expert who would work on the charm bracelet and cameo brooch. His shop was in an old building with tall windows. Inside smelled like metal polish and old wood. The expert was an elderly man with white hair and careful hands. He wore magnifying glasses on a chain around his neck. Dr. Kowalski introduced us and he shook my hand gently. She'd already brought him the damaged pieces. He led us to a workbench where grandmother's charm bracelet lay spread out. Each charm was separated from the chain. He picked up the little Eiffel Tower with tweezers. He showed me the scratch marks where someone had forced it off. He handled everything with the reverence the pieces deserved. He promised to document every step of the restoration process. Watching him examine each charm carefully made my chest feel less tight. The restoration expert explained the timeline. The charm bracelet would take approximately 4 months to properly restore. He needed to carefully reattach each charm to the original chain. He wanted to minimize the damage from their forced removal. He brought out a binder with photos of similar work he'd done. Page after page showed before and after images of antique jewelry. He explained his techniques in detail, how he'd clean each piece, how he'd repair the attachment points, how he'd polish out scratches without removing original patina. I felt grateful that grandmother's pieces were in skilled and respectful hands. Someone who understood they weren't just jewelry, but pieces of history. 2 weeks after the sentencing, I started seeing a therapist. My boss had recommended her. The first session, I sat in a chair across from a woman with kind eyes and a notebook. I told her about the jewelry theft, about my mother's betrayal, about the legal battle, about feeling right, but also sad. The therapist listened and took notes. At the end, she said something that stuck with me. She said I could be right about protecting my inheritance while still feeling sad about losing the relationship with my mother. She said these feelings don't cancel each other out. Both things could be true at the same time. I'd spent weeks thinking I had to choose between being right and being hurt. Hearing that I could feel both things made something release in my chest. The next week, my aunt called me. She's my mother's older sister, and we'd always been close when I was growing up. She said she was proud of me for standing up for grandmother's things. She told me my mother has always needed people to like her more than anything else. Even as kids, my mother would give away her favorite toys if it meant someone would be her friend. My aunt said it's not my job to fix my mother or give up my inheritance to make her feel better about her choices. Hearing someone from the family say I did the right thing made my chest feel less tight. My aunt told me something else too. Grandmother had talked to her about the legal stuff she was setting up for the jewelry. Grandmother worried about my mother's need for approval, but didn't want to cut her out completely. She just wanted to protect me and the family history. Knowing grandmother thought all this through, so carefully made me feel less alone. She'd seen this coming and loved me enough to plan for it. 3 months after the sentencing, my phone rang while I was at work. The restoration expert's number showed on the screen. He said the charm bracelet was finished and I could come see it. I told my boss I needed to leave early and drove to his workshop. My hands shook on the steering wheel. I was scared about what I'd find. Scared the bracelet wouldn't look right. Scared Vanessa had broken something that couldn't be fixed. The workshop smelled like metal polish when I walked in. The expert led me to his workbench. The charm bracelet lay on a piece of black cloth. Each charm was back in its place. The little Eiffel Tower from Paris, the gondola from Venice, the Big Ben from London, the tiny cable car from San Francisco, all 14 charms attached to the original chain. I picked it up with shaking fingers. The scratches from where Vanessa had ripped them off were almost gone. He'd polished them so carefully. The expert showed me photos of the bracelet when he first got it. All the charms separated and damaged. Then photos of each step of fixing it. How he cleaned each piece. How he repaired the attachment points. How he brought back the shine without removing the old look that made it special. I started crying right there in his workshop. It felt like getting a piece of grandmother back. Like she was less gone somehow. The expert handed me a tissue and smiled. He said he'd worked on lots of old jewelry, but this piece was special because of all the history. He'd documented everything in a binder for me. Photos and notes about every repair. I thanked him about 5 times and carefully put the bracelet in the padded box he provided. Driving home, I kept looking at the box on my passenger seat. The cameo brooch would take longer, he'd told me. The original Victorian setting was destroyed when Vanessa had it removed. He needed to find a replacement setting from the right time period. It had to match the era and style. He was searching estate sales and antique dealers. It might take a few more months. I told him to take whatever time he needed. I wanted it done right. 5 months after my mother stole the jewelry, I got another call from the restoration expert. The cameo brooch was ready. I drove back to his workshop on a Saturday morning. He showed me the brooch on his workbench. The cameo itself looked perfect. The carved woman's profile in cream against the brown background. But the setting around it was different. Not grandmother's original gold Victorian frame with the tiny seed pearls. This new setting was still Victorian era. Still gold. Still appropriate for the time period. But it wasn't hers. The expert explained he'd found it at an estate sale in Connecticut. A woman's jewelry collection from the 1880s. The setting was the right size and style. He'd mounted the cameo carefully to preserve it. I held the brooch and felt sad and grateful at the same time. Sad that grandmother's original setting was gone forever. Grateful that this expert cared enough to find something respectful. I decided right then to have all the pieces photographed again by a professional. New documentation that included what happened. The theft, the damage, the restoration. These stories were part of the jewelry's history now too. 2 weeks later, a letter arrived at my apartment. My mother's handwriting on the envelope. Expensive cream stationery. I sat on my couch and opened it. 3 pages of her neat cursive writing. She was sorry. Sorry things happened this way. Sorry I was hurt. Sorry the situation got so hard. She thought she was doing the right thing. Vanessa needed something special for her wedding. Family should share. She never meant to hurt me. She hoped someday I'd understand. She wanted to fix our relationship. The letter went on and on. I read it 3 times. Looking for the words that mattered. Looking for her to say she was wrong. That she shouldn't have taken my things. That she chose Vanessa's approval over me. But those words weren't there. She was sorry I felt bad. Sorry things went wrong. Sorry it got messy. But she never said she was wrong to steal from me. Never said she was wrong to give away grandmother's legacy for one hug from someone who treated her like trash for 6 years. I got out my own stationery and wrote back. 1 page. I told her I love her, but I can't have a relationship with someone who values approval from mean people more than her own daughter. I told her grandmother's jewelry is safe now. Properly restored. Protected. I told her I learned I'm stronger than I thought. That I can stand up for what matters even when it's hard. That maybe someday she'll understand why having boundaries matters more than fake peace that costs everything real. I mailed the letter the next day. My mother didn't write back. Through my aunt, I heard about Vanessa. She finished her community service at a local museum. I found that funny in a dark way since she destroyed historical things. Harrison ended their engagement. His family didn't want the connection to someone with a criminal record. Vanessa was working 2 jobs now. A coffee shop and a retail store. trying to pay off the $47,000 in restitution. My aunt said Vanessa tells everyone who will listen that I'm a terrible person who ruined her life over jewelry, that I'm mean and cold, that I should have just let her keep the pieces. I asked my aunt to stop telling me about Vanessa. I didn't need to know about her life anymore. She made her choices, she faced the results. That wasn't my problem to think about. I opened Instagram first and found Vanessa's profile, my finger sitting over the block button for just a second before I pressed it, then Facebook, then Twitter. Each click felt like closing a door I should have shut years ago. My aunt called that evening and started telling me about Vanessa's second job at some retail store, and I stopped her mid-sentence. I told her I needed her to stop passing along information about Vanessa, that I didn't want to know about her life anymore, that hearing about her struggles wasn't helping me heal. My aunt was quiet for a moment, then said she understood and would respect that boundary. At my next therapy session, I told the therapist about blocking Vanessa and asking my aunt to stop the updates. The therapist nodded and said this was healthy boundary setting, that I could know Vanessa faced consequences without making her problems my concern. She said sometimes the kindest thing we can do for ourselves is stop tracking the lives of people who hurt us. 6 months after the theft, I drove to the bank with a locked case containing all 43 pieces of grandmother's jewelry. The restoration expert had finished the last piece 3 weeks earlier, and I'd kept everything at my apartment in the safe I bought specifically for this purpose. The new bank was across town, far from anywhere my mother or Philip might go, and I'd chosen it carefully. I filled out the paperwork for a safety deposit box with only my name on the access list. No authorized users, no emergency contacts. The bank employee led me to the vault and I placed each piece carefully in the metal box, touching the pearl necklace one last time before closing the lid. That same week, I met with a lawyer about updating my will. I told her I wanted specific language about who inherits what and under what conditions, that I'd learned from grandmother's wisdom about planning ahead. She drafted documents that named exactly which pieces went to which potential heirs, included clauses about Heritage Foundation registration, specified that nothing could be sold or modified without written consent. I signed everything and left her office feeling like I'd finally finished what grandmother started, protecting her legacy for whatever came next. The leather journal sat on my kitchen table for 2 weeks before I finally opened it and started writing. I'd documented the basic facts about each piece already, the dates and places and historical details, but now I added the stories grandmother told me when I was young. The way her voice sounded when she described hiding the emerald ring in a flower jar, how her hands shook when she showed me the cameo brooch from her citizenship ceremony. I wrote about the charm bracelet and how she explained each charm, the one from Vienna where she ate her first meal as a free woman, the one from Paris where she cried looking at the Eiffel Tower because she never thought she'd see it. I filled pages with her memories, her survival, her journey from Budapest to America, with nothing but hope and these precious objects. Then I wrote about the theft and the legal battle and the restoration, adding this chapter to the collection's history. Someday I'd have a daughter of my own, and she'd read these pages and know not just about the jewelry, but about the strength it takes to protect what matters when family makes it hard. Grandmother's birthday fell on a Tuesday in November, cold and gray with that specific autumn feeling that makes everything seem more serious. She would have been 92. I put on the simple gold band she'd given me for my 18th birthday, and drove to the cemetery where she was buried next to my grandfather. I stood at her grave and told her everything, about the theft and Vanessa and the criminal charges, about the restored pieces now safe in a bank across town, about my mother and Philip and how those relationships didn't survive my refusal to be stolen from. I thanked her for teaching me that some things are worth fighting for, that survival means more than just staying alive. The gold band felt warm on my finger despite the cold air, and I realized the strongest thing she left me wasn't the jewelry at all. It was the courage to protect what's mine, and the wisdom to know my worth isn't decided by people who can't see it.